The galaxy had lived in uneasy silence for many years. Old rivalries between alien empires still burned like dying coals, but no one dared to strike a spark. Then came the humans. They were late arrivals to the galactic stage, a young race with strange ideas of honor, loyalty, and courage. At first, no one feared them. They were fragile compared to the scaled giants of Zarth or the armored clans of Dravok. But the humans carried something inside them, something that unsettled even the oldest races, an unwillingness to bow. Among the Dravok clans, there was a proud warrior princess. Her name was whispered in fear and respect across countless systems. She was young, beautiful, and deadly. With crimson skin, silver hair, and eyes that glowed like fire, she was the symbol of her people's power. She was raised to believe that humans were beneath her, creatures of dirt and weakness, unworthy even as slaves. The very thought of being linked to one filled her with shame. War began not with armies but with a single insult. A human captain refused to kneel before the Dravok Council. He stood tall in their grand chamber surrounded by armored warriors and spoke with a voice that did not tremble. The princess herself was there. She laughed at him, mocking his frailty, calling him filthy and unfit even to breathe their air. Her words echoed across the hall, a challenge and a curse. But humans were strange. Insults did not break them. The captain only smiled, a small, fearless smile, and said nothing. That silence cut deeper than any blade. It was the first spark. The next days brought fire. Skirmishes erupted across the stars. Human ships, though small, fought with a ferocity that shocked their enemies. Where other races calculated odds, humans gambled with everything. They fought not only with weapons but with spirit, and that spirit spread like wildfire. The Dravok had planned to crush them quickly. Instead, they found themselves in a war they could not control. The princess led her armies with pride. She thought little of the human threat, believing each battle would be their last. But every clash ended the same way. The humans fought until their ships burned, until their blood soaked the ground, until the sky itself seemed to shatter. And still, they stood. She met the human captain again on the battlefield. Smoke rose around them and broken war machines lay in ruin. He was wounded, his armor scorched, but his eyes still held that same steady fire. She spat at his feet, calling him nothing more than a stubborn insect. Yet when his soldiers rallied behind him, refusing to fall, she felt an emotion she did not understand. It was not fear, it was not respect, it was something heavier, something that twisted inside her like shame. The war grew larger. Entire systems fell into chaos. What began as a clash of pride was turning into something that would decide the fate of empires. The Dravok Council demanded the princess bring the human captain before them, alive if possible. They wanted to break him in chains and parade him as a lesson to his people. She swore she would do it not only for her people but for herself. His defiance had become a wound to her pride, one she could not allow to remain open. As the battle drums echoed across the galaxy, the princess sharpened her blades and prepared for the hunt. But deep within her heart, though she would never admit it, his smile haunted her. It whispered to her in the silence of the night, daring her to remember that moment in the council chamber when her laughter had failed to break him. The unexpected war had begun, and with it, so had the story that neither of them could escape. The battlefield after the first great clash was silent except for the wind. Ships floated broken in orbit, their fires painting the darkness in shades of red and gold. On the ground, the cries of the wounded mixed with the smoke that curled through the air. The Dravok forces had not expected such resistance, and in the center of it all stood the human captain, his armor cracked but his spirit unbroken. The princess watched him from a distance. Her troops had carried her from the front lines when the tide shifted. She had commanded battles for years, yet something about this one unsettled her. It was not the losses. They were painful but expected in war. It was not even the stubbornness of the humans. No, it was him. That human captain who refused to kneel, who smiled even when the odds were hopeless. His presence felt like an insult. to everything she believed. She returned to her command tent, her armor still smeared with ash. Advisors surrounded her, their voices urgent. They spoke of strategies, of traps and overwhelming numbers. But she barely listened. Her mind was on the way the captain's soldiers had stood with him. She had seen warriors fight for their lives before, but this was different. They had fought as if his courage had become their own. Filthy human, she muttered under her breath, gripping the edge of the table. He defies me and they worship him. The council sent fresh orders. The humans were to be pursued with all force. The princess was to lead personally, for her honor was now tied to the war. She accepted without hesitation. This was no longer just a battle between empires. This was between her and him. Every insult she had thrown at him demanded proof. Every word she had spoken before her people now bound her. She would drag him back in chains and the galaxy would see her triumph. Meanwhile, the human captain and his soldiers moved through ruined cities, gathering survivors. He had no illusions of victory in numbers. The humans were fewer, weaker, and outmatched in weapons. But he knew something the Dravok did not. He knew that humans had always been underestimated. On Earth, they had risen from nothing, facing predators, storms, and endless wars, yet still they stood. To him, this was no different. When his men asked what they should do, he told them to hold, to stand where they were, even if the enemy came with greater strength. "They think we will run," he said, his voice calm but sharp like a blade. "Let them come, we will not move." Word of his defiance spread. Other human ships scattered across the war began to turn toward him. Refugees became fighters. Small bands of soldiers became armies. And everywhere his name was spoken, there was the same reaction. Humans refused to kneel. The princess learned of this from her scouts. Her fury only deepened. She was a warrior raised on victories, on the belief that her people were chosen above all others. Yet here was a man who shattered that belief simply by standing. She sharpened her blades each night, her reflection staring back at her with eyes that burned brighter than the fires outside. She told herself she hated him. She told herself he was nothing. And still, when she closed her eyes, she saw him again, in the council chamber, calm against her laughter. The next clash came on the barren world of Harvok. Dust storms swept across the ground, turning the sky into a swirling sea of brown and gray. The humans were dug in among the ruins of old towers. The Dravok forces marched in gleaming armor, confident of their strength. The princess led from the front, her voice commanding, her presence a fire that pushed her soldiers forward. But when she saw him waiting among the ruins, armor battered but eyes still steady, something inside her shifted. She tightened her grip on her weapon, not out of anger but out of a strange heaviness she did not understand. Her shame was growing, though she would not name it. The war was no longer about victory alone. It was becoming something else. Something neither she nor he could escape. The dust storms on Harvok raged like living things. Visibility was poor, but both armies pressed on, each unwilling to retreat. The Dravok marched in tight formations, their black banners cutting through the haze. The humans, scattered and fewer in number, used the ruins as cover, striking quickly and vanishing again into the storm. The world itself seemed to tremble under the weight of their conflict. The princess charged forward with her warriors, her blade flashing in the dim light. She was swift, deadly, every movement as precise as the training of her people demanded. But even as her soldiers fell upon the humans, she searched for one face, the face of the man who haunted her thoughts. And then through the swirling dust she saw him. The human captain stood at the top of a broken tower, his cloak whipping in the wind, his soldiers holding the ground beneath him. His weapon gleamed faintly, though battered like the rest of his gear. Around him his men fought with desperate determination. But it was not desperation she saw in him, it was certainty. He stood as though the storm itself answered to him. Her fury ignited. She cut down every human in her path, pushing toward him. Her warriors shouted her name, their voices echoing, but she hardly heard them. The storm, the screams, the clash of blades, all blurred around her. Only he remained clear. When she reached the base of the tower, she leapt upward with the strength of her kind, landing before him. Dust and ash swirled between them as their eyes locked. His weapon was already raised. Hers gleamed in answer. "You will kneel today," she hissed, her voice sharp and filled with pride. He did not flinch. His eyes met hers with steady fire. Humans do not kneel. Their blades clashed. The sound echoed like thunder through the ruins. Sparks flew as steel met steel, and the storm seemed to grow louder around them. She was faster, her strikes precise, honed by years of combat. He was slower, but his movements were filled with raw strength and an unyielding spirit that matched hers. Blow after blow rang out, each one testing not just skill but will. For a moment she thought she had him. Her blade cut across his armor, leaving a deep mark. She pressed forward, forcing him back step by step. Yet he did not yield. Each time she struck, he answered. Each time she pushed, he pushed back. Her people believed humans to be weak, yet here was one who stood against her as an equal. The battle around them raged on, but neither noticed. It was as if the war had narrowed to just the two of them. Their clash was not only of blades, but of pride, of belief, of something deeper neither wanted to name. At last, a blast from a falling tower shook the ground. The shockwave knocked them both apart, scattering debris between them. Smoke filled the air, and soldiers from both sides rushed in to shield their leaders. The moment was broken, but the memory of it burned. The princess was pulled back by her guards, her chest rising and falling with anger and something she did not understand. She had not won, she had not lost, and that was worse than defeat. She wanted his head on the ground. Yet some part of her mind whispered of the fire in his eyes, of the way he stood unbroken against her. The human captain, too, was dragged away by his men. His armor was dented, his arm bloodied, but his spirit was fierce. When his soldiers looked to him expecting orders, he simply said, "We hold." And they cheered, their voices rising even in the storm. From that day, whispers began to spread through both armies. Whispers that the princess of Dravok and the human captain were bound in some strange way. They had clashed like enemies, yet the fire between them was different from hatred alone. The war was not ending. It was only changing, and with it, so were they. The war did not slow after Harvok. If anything, it grew faster, spreading from system to system like a sickness that no one could cure. The Dravok Council demanded vengeance for every loss, and the humans answered with defiance for every blow. Armies clashed in space, fleets burned across starfields, and planets trembled beneath the weight of their struggle. But among the endless battles, one truth lingered. The princess and the human captain could not avoid each other. Wherever she led, he appeared. Wherever he fought, she was near. Their rivalry became legend. Soldiers on both sides whispered that the war itself seemed drawn to their meetings, as though fate demanded they face one another again and again. Tior, princess, told herself it was duty. She was bound to crush him, to erase the insult he had given her in the council chamber. Yet in the quiet of her chambers, when she removed her armor and sat alone in the flickering light of her warship, her thoughts betrayed her. She remembered the clash of blades on Harvok, the steadiness in his eyes. She remembered how he had not fallen. That memory burned hotter than any wound. Her advisors noticed her distraction. "Princess," one of them warned, "you give him too much of your mind. He is only a human, a pest." She snapped back at them, her voice sharp as steel. "He is not only a human, he is a symbol, and symbols are more dangerous than armies." Across the stars, the captain faced his own burdens. Supplies were low. His men were tired. They had won victories that should have been impossible, but each one left them weaker. Still, he refused to yield. At night, sitting among the wounded, he spoke quietly, reminding them of Earth, of their homes, of the families who would live free if they held on. His words were simple, but they struck deep. The men clung to them like lifelines, yet even he could not escape her shadow. In every report, her name surfaced. In every battle, he saw her red armor and burning eyes. He told himself she was the enemy, the face of the Empire trying to crush his people. But sometimes when silence fell and he closed his eyes, he saw her differently. Not as a monster, but as a warrior who carried the same weight he did, the weight of expectation, of pride, of duty. It unsettled him. Their next encounter came on the frozen moon of Heir. Ice stretched across the land like glass, and the sky shimmered with auroras that twisted in green and violet light. The battle began with fire, weapons melting the surface, turning the frozen plains into rivers of steam. The princess fought at the head of her army, her movements sharp and flawless. The human captain met her once more, his blade raised against hers. The cold air froze their breaths as their weapons clashed. Around them, the world cracked beneath the fury of their armies. "You should have surrendered long ago," she shouted, her voice echoing across the icy plains. "And Neil?" he answered, striking hard. "Never." The fight was brutal. She struck with precision, but he fought with raw determination that would not break. At one point, the ice beneath them shattered, and they both fell into freezing waters. For a brief instant they struggled side by side, fighting not each other but the deadly current. They emerged, gasping, weapons still in hand, their eyes locked. Something unspoken passed between them in that moment. Something neither could deny. Their soldiers pulled them apart again, the battle raging on. But the memory lingered. The princess felt it burning in her chest, like a secret fire. The captain, too, could not push it away. The war still roared around them, yet inside both, their hearts, another war had begun. The frozen moon of Heir was left behind, but its echoes followed both armies. Neither side claimed victory, though neither admitted defeat. The Dravok council raged at the princess, demanding she end the war with a crushing strike. The humans, meanwhile, hailed their captain as a symbol of defiance, even as their numbers thinned. The princess walked the halls of her flagship in silence, her armor gleaming under the pale lights. She had been praised for her skill, yet she felt no pride. Every time her blade had clashed with his, she had failed to break him. The memory of their struggle in the icy waters stayed with her, sharper than steel. He had been her enemy. Yet, in that moment, they had fought side by side against death itself. The thought unsettled her. In her private chamber, she studied the stars beyond the window. Somewhere out there, he was preparing for their next meeting. She clenched her fists, telling herself it was hatred that drove her thoughts. But a whisper inside her heart said otherwise. She pushed it away. On the other side of the war, the human captain tended to his wounded. He wrapped bandages with his own hands, spoke softly to the dying, and walked among his soldiers as one of them, not above them. That was why they followed him. Not because he was stronger, but because he bore their burdens. Still, when the campfire burned low and silence fell, his thoughts betrayed him. He saw her again, the princess with crimson skin and eyes like fire. He should have hated her, but hatred no longer came so easily. The war stretched on, wearing both armies thin. Supply lines faltered. Entire planets became graveyards. Yet strangely, the soldiers began to speak less of victory, and more of the two who led them. To the Dravok, she was their unshakable blade. To the humans, he was their unbroken shield. Whispers grew that the war was no longer between empires, but between two hearts bound by fate. Their next meeting came above the shattered world of Dren. Fleets clashed in orbit, ships burning as they fell like meteors. In the chaos, the princess's warship collided with a human vessel, and both spiraled toward the planet's surface. Fire consumed the skies as they crashed among the ruins. The princess crawled from the wreckage, her armor scorched, her body aching. Around her silence reigned. The battlefield had swallowed her army, scattering them across the ruins. When she rose to her feet, she found him there. The human captain, blood on his brow, standing among the wreckage as though fate had dragged them together once again. For a long moment, neither raised a weapon. The storm of war was distant, muffled by the ruin around them. Only their breaths filled the silence. "You should not be alive," she said, her voice low, almost weary. You've tried to kill me enough times, he answered with a faint smile. It seems I'm harder to break than you thought. Chest tightened. His calmness was an insult, yet it stirred something else inside her. She lifted her blade at last, though her hand trembled. This ends here. But he did not move to strike. Instead, he stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. Then strike, he said quietly, if you truly want to. She froze, her heart pounded. For the first time in her life, her blade felt heavy in her hand. His gaze pierced her, not with defiance alone, but with something deeper. Something that felt like truth. The ruins around them groaned as fire burned through the night, but neither moved. For the first time, it was not hatred that bound them in silence. It was something far more dangerous. The ruins of Dren were silent, except for the crackling of fire and the distant rumble of falling stone. The princess stood with her blade raised, but she did not strike. The human captain's eyes met hers, calm and steady, and for reasons she could not explain, her hand refused to move. Before either could act, the ground beneath them shook violently. The crash of their ships had weakened the ruins, and now the towers above them began to collapse. Stone and steel rained from the sky. Without thinking, the captain lunged forward, knocking her aside as a wall came crashing down. Dust swallowed them both. When the world settled, the princess found herself pinned beneath his weight, his body shielding hers from the debris. She pushed him off with a snarl, fury burning in her chest. "Why would you save me?" she demanded. He coughed, blood streaking his lips, but his voice was steady. "Because death is not yours today. Not like this." Her heart twisted. She told herself it was insult, an enemy daring to decide her fate, but deep inside the truth unsettled her more. He had risked his life not to defeat her, but to protect her. Hours passed as they searched the ruins, finding no sign of their armies. Both fleets had retreated, leaving the battlefield behind. For the first time since the war began, they were alone. No guards, no soldiers, no banners, only two enemies trapped in the same wasteland. The princess tried to walk away, her pride demanding distance, but the storm above made the land unlivable. Poisonous winds howled across the ruins, forcing them to seek shelter together. Against her will, she followed him into the wreckage of a half-collapsed hall. Inside, the cold bit at their skin. She sat across from him, her eyes glowing in the dim light. He bound a cut on his arm, his movements calm, steady. The silence between them was heavier than any battle. "You should have killed me when you had the chance," she said at last, her voice sharp. He looked up, his expression unreadable. "Maybe, but I don't kill for pride." His words stung as though he had pierced through her armor without a blade. Pride had always been her strength, her shield. Now it felt like a chain. She turned her gaze away, unwilling to let him see the storm in her eyes. The night deepened, the ruin groaning around them. To survive, they built a small fire from broken wreckage. Its glow cast strange shadows across the walls, painting their faces in flickering light. For a long time, neither spoke. Finally, he broke the silence. "Why do you hate us so much?" She bristled, her voice low. "Because you are weak. Because you should have been crushed the moment you reached the stars. Yet you stand again and again. It makes no sense." He gave a faint smile, though it did not reach his tired eyes. "Maybe weakness is strength, when you refuse to fall." Her heart trembled. She hated the truth in his words, hated that some part of her understood. She had seen it herself, humans standing in impossible battles, refusing to kneel. It was not weakness. It was something else, something she could not name. The fire crackled between them, their eyes meeting once more. For the first time, there was no blade, no army, no command. Only silence, heavy with everything unspoken. She looked away quickly, tightening her grip on her blade as if to remind herself of who she was. But in her chest, the fire burned hotter than the flames before them. The ruins of Dren groaned under the weight of storms that swept across the sky. Jagged lightning cracked through the poisonous clouds, and the ground shuddered as if the planet itself wanted to swallow what remained of the battle. The princess and the human captain stayed within the broken hall, bound not by choice but by survival. The fire between them burned low. She sharpened her blade, its edge gleaming in the flickering light. He sat across from her, repairing the straps of his dented armor with steady hands. They did not speak at first, but silence carried its own weight. Finally, the captain broke it. "Your people will return for you." She lifted her eyes, her voice cold. "And yours for you. The war is not finished." "No," he agreed softly, his gaze steady. "But for now, we're all that's left." She wanted to deny it, wanted to remind him that he was her enemy, that she had sworn to drag him before her council in chains. But the truth pressed on her. Without him, she would not have survived the storm. That thought stung her pride more than any wound. The storm outside grew worse. Poisonous winds howled against the shattered walls, seeping through cracks. He moved to block one opening with broken metal, his movements heavy from exhaustion. She watched him, torn between contempt and curiosity. He had fought her with a strength that matched her own, yet here he was, working without complaint, even for her safety. "Why do you keep standing?" she asked suddenly, her voice sharper than intended. "Even when your body breaks, even when defeat surrounds you. Why?" He looked at her, his eyes tired but unyielding. "Because if I fall, others fall with me, and I refuse to see my people bow." His answer struck something deep within her. She had always believed strength was born from bloodlines, from training, from power. But this man's strength came from something else entirely. Something she could not name, but something that burned brighter than her own pride. The night stretched long. At some point, exhaustion weighed down even her restless thoughts. She leaned back against the cold wall, her eyes drifting shut. When she woke hours later, the fire had gone out. The hall was dark, but she saw him sitting near the doorway, his weapon in hand, watching the storm outside. "You stayed awake," she murmured. "Someone had to," he said simply. She turned her gaze away, her heart twisting. No Dravok warrior would waste their strength guarding an enemy. Yet he had. Not because of duty, not because of command, but because it was in his nature. That truth unsettled her more than the storm. When dawn finally broke, pale light filtered through the cracks of the ruin. The storm had calmed, but the land was still deadly. They would need to move carefully if they hoped to survive long enough for their armies to find them. She stood, brushing ash from her armor, and looked at him. "This changes nothing," she said, her voice low but firm. "You are still my enemy." He gave the faintest of smiles. "Then we'll survive as enemies." And so they walked together, through the ruins, their steps echoing in the silence. They spoke little, yet the air between them had changed. No longer was it filled with the hatred of the council chamber or the fury of battle. It was heavier, complicated, filled with something neither could speak aloud. The war still raged across the galaxy, but here, in the ruins of Dren, a different war had begun. One fought not with blades, but within their own hearts. The ruins stretched on for miles, twisted steel and broken stone rising like jagged teeth from the ground. The air was thick with dust, and every step carried the weight of exhaustion. The princess led the way with silent pride, her crimson skin catching the pale light of the shattered sky. The human captain followed, steady but slower, his wounds deeper than he admitted. At first, neither spoke. Silence seemed safer than words. Yet silence could not hide everything. She noticed the way he favored his side, the way his steps grew heavier. His wounds were worse than she thought. "You are slowing," she said sharply, as if the words were a command. "I'm fine," he answered, though his voice betrayed strain. She stopped, turning on him with fire in her eyes. "If you fall, I will not carry you." Good, he said with a faint smile. I'd rather crawl than owe you that. Her anger flared, but beneath it was something else. Without realizing it, she reached for his arm when he stumbled, steadying him. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat too long, neither moved. She released him quickly, her hand trembling as she pulled away. They pressed on until night fell. The storm returned, forcing them into the shelter of a collapsed temple. Its high walls still bore the carvings of an ancient race long gone, their faces watching silently as if judging the unlikely pair within. The captain collapsed near the wall, his breathing heavy. The princess sat across from him, sharpening her blade, though her eyes kept flicking toward him. His strength amazed her. No Dravok warrior could have endured what he had. Yet he did not complain. He simply endured. Why fight a war you cannot win? She asked at last, her voice quieter than before. He looked at her through the shadows. Because sometimes winning isn't about survival. It's about refusing to bow, even if it costs everything. Her chest tightened. She wanted to dismiss his words as foolishness, but they echoed inside her. She had been raised to believe victory meant domination, that pride was power. But he spoke of something else, something she had never known. The fire between them flickered, its light painting her features in a glow. He studied her for a moment, then said softly, "You're not what I expected." Her head snapped toward him, eyes burning. "And what did you expect? A monster?" He didn't flinch. "No, a prisoner of your own pride." The words cut deeper than any blade. She wanted to strike him for his insolence, yet her hand did not move. Instead, she turned away, her jaw tight, her heart racing. Silence fell again, but it was no longer the silence of strangers. It was heavy, alive, filled with everything unspoken. The princess felt the fire of anger and something else. Something dangerous, something she could not admit even to herself. Hours later, as the storm howled outside, the captain stirred. He coughed, his strength failing, and slumped against the wall. Without thinking, she moved to his side, pressing a hand to his wound. His skin was warm beneath her touch, his breath shallow. "Foolish human," she whispered, though her voice trembled. "You fight so hard, yet your body betrays you." His eyes opened slowly, meeting hers. Even in weakness, his gaze held the same steady fire. "Then you'll have to keep me alive, princess." Her heart jolted. No soldier of hers would ever dare speak to her like that. Yet when he said it, she did not strike him. Instead, her hand lingered on his chest, steadying his breath. In the ruined temple, under the eyes of forgotten gods, something shifted. Two enemies sat side by side, no longer only bound by hatred or war, but by the fragile, dangerous thread of survival. And something more neither dared to name. The storm outside the ruined temple raged for days. Poison winds howled through the broken walls, and ash rained down from the shattered skies. Trapped inside, the princess and the human captain were forced into silence, forced into waiting. At first, she told herself she despised the closeness. She kept her blade sharp, her armor polished, as if to remind herself that she was still Dravok, still a warrior, still above him. Yet every time she glanced at him, leaning against the wall, his breath heavy but steady, her resolve wavered. His body was broken, yet his spirit refused to fade. It stirred something inside her she could not name. One night the fire burned low, casting long shadows across the cracked stone. He stirred from his half-sleep, his voice hoarse but calm. "Why do you carry so much anger?" Her eyes narrowed, her pride rising. "Because anger is strength." "No," he said softly, shaking his head. "Anger is a chain. Strength is what keeps you standing when anger fades." His words cut through her like a blade. She wanted to argue, to strike him down for daring to challenge her. But instead she sat in silence, her chest tightening. For the first time in her life, she wondered if pride alone was enough. The days passed. His wound worsened, fever burning through his body. She tried to ignore it, tried to tell herself it was his fate, that she owed him nothing. Yet when his breath grew shallow, she found herself kneeling beside him, pressing her hand to his chest, whispering words she did not even believe. "Do not die, human," she murmured, her voice shaking. "Not like this." His eyes opened slowly, fire still, flickering within them. "You care," he whispered. Her heart jolted, her breath catching in her throat. "I do not," she snapped, but the lie tasted bitter on her tongue. As the storm eased, she left the temple in search of supplies, braving the poisonous winds. She returned hours later with fragments of medicine and food salvaged from the wreckage. He watched her with tired eyes, and for the first time she could not meet his gaze. That night, as he regained some strength, he spoke again. "You are not what you pretend to be." She stiffened. "I am a warrior of Dravok. I am pride, I am power." He shook his head slowly. "No, you are more than that. You're afraid to be seen as anything else." Her chest burned. No one had ever spoken to her like this. Not her advisors, not her warriors, not even her council. Only him. And the worst part was that he was right. When she finally looked at him, the firelight reflected in her glowing eyes. For the first time, there was no hatred there, no scorn. Only confusion, only the weight of something deeper. He reached for her hand. It was a simple gesture, nothing more than a touch. Yet when his rough, scarred fingers brushed against hers, she did not pull away. Instead, her heart pounded with a force that left her breathless. The silence between them broke, not with words, but with the truth they could no longer deny. Enemy and enemy, bound by pride, bound by war, now bound by something greater. She should have pulled away. She should have remembered her oath, her people, her counsel. But in that moment, all she saw was him. Not as a human, not as an enemy, but as the one who refused to kneel, the one who stood unbroken against her, and the one who had shown her a strength no Dravok had ever given. Outside, the storm faded, the skies clearing for the first time in days. But inside the temple, a new storm raged, a storm within their hearts, unstoppable and undeniable. The storm broke at last, and with it came the end of silence. Rescue ships descended upon the ruins of Dren, one side marked with the banners of the Dravok, the other carrying the human crest. Soldiers poured into the wreckage, searching for their leaders. The princess rose from the temple's shadows, her crimson armor gleaming faintly in the pale light. The human captain stood beside her, his wounds still raw but his spirit unshaken. For days they had survived together, enemies forced into closeness. Now the moment of choice had come. Her warriors rushed to her side, their voices filled with relief and pride. "Princess, we feared you lost," they cried, kneeling at her feet. Behind her, the human soldiers shouted their captain's name, lifting their weapons high in triumph. For a brief instant, both armies froze, their gazes falling on the two figures who had walked from the ruins together. The sight was strange, unsettling. The Dravok princess and the human captain alive side by side. The council's voice echoed in her mind. Bring him back in chains. Her pride screamed for her to lift her blade, to strike him down before both armies. Yet her heart burned with a different fire, one born in the silence of the ruins, in the weight of his steady gaze. He met her eyes, calm as always, though she could see the storm inside him too. "This is where we end it," he said, softly so only she could hear. Not as enemies, but as something more. Her chest tightened. Around them the battlefield waited. Every soldier, every banner, every empire, waiting for her to choose. Slowly she lowered her blade. Gasps rippled through her people, shock spreading like wildfire. The council would call it betrayal, yet she no longer cared. For the first time in her life, she chose not pride, not duty, but truth. The captain raised his voice, speaking to both sides at once. "How many more worlds must burn? How many more lives must be lost?
The war was born from insult and pride. Let it end here. With us. Murmurs spread through the soldiers, human and Dravok alike. For years they had fought, bled, and died, yet
neither side had truly gained. Perhaps his words struck deeper than the sharpest blade, because no one moved to strike. The princess stepped forward, her eyes blazing. The humans have shown they will not kneel, and the Dravok will not bow. Then let this war end, not with chains but with blood bound by choice. Her words carried through the ruins, echoing across the battlefield. She placed her hand over her chest, her voice fierce yet trembling. I will take him as mine. Not as a prisoner, but as a mate. His strength will live through me. His fire will live through my air. Shock thundered across the field. Dravok warriors stared in disbelief. Human soldiers froze. Yet neither side moved, as though the weight of destiny itself held them. The captain stood still, his face unreadable. Then, slowly, he stepped to her side. He did not kneel, did not bow. He simply stood as her equal, their shoulders touching. In that moment, the war broke. Not with another battle, but with silence. The galaxy would whisper of it for generations. The proud Dravok princess who once scorned a human as filthy, and the unbroken captain who stood against her. Their bond ended, a war no weapon could. As the fleets withdrew and the battlefield emptied, she turned to him in the fading light. Her pride still burned, but now it burned with something else, something stronger. You are still beneath me, she said softly, though her lips curved with the faintest smile. And yet, he answered, his hand brushing hers. You chose me. For the first time in her life, she let the smile remain. The war had ended, but their story was only beginning.